welcome George de Bono from Australia to the lockdown sessions. This is excellent and very exciting. How are you, sir?
I'm well, Brad. It's good to see you again. It's been way too long, my friend.
Right. So you and I have known each other, for those that are listening, for 10 plus years,
11.
maybe?
I'll age us a bit. It's actually 11.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So we met back in 2010. We did a lot of work together in the Middle East as well. We used to do workshops and development programs together. So we sang from definitely that same hymn sheet when it came to believing in people. And we always had a nice connection on sport. I remember that as well, and talking sport. So the chance to get you on here as we bring these lockdown sessions to a close, right? Because once we come out of lockdown, I need to do something new. I thought it would be cool to hear your perspective, because you're always busy. You work as a senior sales leader, so you're a top senior guy in business. You said it before, commercialization expert, so that's consulting, that's helping people drive strategy. How have you coped with the lockdown, right? I mean, Australia, I know it's maybe easier to lock the place down because you're so far away, but it's been a year, right? How have you been coping?
It's been an interesting challenge because when businesses aren't making money, they make cuts, right? And one of the first things you cut are the luxuries, and external consultants are a luxury. So that side of it's been difficult, but you find a way. You find a way. And I listened to your session with Nudgler, and I heard you use a term which I thought, yeah, that resonates and it works. I mean, we're suffering first world problems, right? I'm fortunate. I've had a good life to this point. I'm not under any financial stress. So that made life a heck of a lot easier.
Right.
And, we were chatting before, and I said it, I've always had the perspective that my lot isn't the worst lot. There's always somebody worse off than me. And I hate to say this, but, we'd be looking at the reports coming in from Italy and France and America and thinking, oh my God, how lucky are we here? And we've got, my wife has family in Malta, and they had a family gathering. One of them was a frontline responder, a nurse in a hospital. So in a gathering of, I think it was a gathering of 20, 12 got corona.
Wow.
So we look at those things and think, Jesus, we've been pretty well lucky here and pretty blessed. And yes, we've missed things. So we didn't have the Formula One Grand Prix last year, and it's interesting. It's that time again. It's sort of 12 months on. I couldn't go and watch all the sport that I used to love and watch. And, fortunately for me, last week I was able to get back into that routine of picking up my daughter and going with her and her fiance and his father to a pub and having a meal, and then walking to the MCG and watching the football, and then walking back to the car and coming home. So that's starting to open up again for us now. So we are coming through it. But the 12 months that we had, it was tough. It was tough, but you find a way.
It's amazing, isn't it? I hear you say, I went with my daughter to the pub with her fiance for a meal, and then we walked to the MCG. And like, my heart's aching because that just sounds so lovely. After a year, that sounds pleasurable, right?
Yeah. So we've been pretty lucky the last couple of years. Our team, and we in the Australian rules, has been extremely successful, and they've won 3 of the last 4 championships. But it had been 530 odd days since we'd actually been able to go to see them play at the MCG. And fortunately for us, the last time we saw them was the 2019 Grand Final, and then we got to see them again last Thursday. So yeah.
And how are the Adelaide Crows doing? Because that was the team I used to go and watch when I was in Australia.
Adelaide Crows had a horrid year last year. They won 3 out of 17, but they've started this year pretty well. They beat the team that finished second last year and beat them pretty comprehensively in the end last week.
Okay, I'm going Go Crows. I remember when they came over to the UK, we used to have an annual Aussie rules football match where they would come over and play over at like Twickenham.
Yep.
And I always used to get a bit sort of bedazzled with Aussie rules football because, you know, you'd be watching from the side and if you didn't know the game, it is odd when you start to see the coach walking onto the pitch, like on the left hand, like the game's going over on the right hand side and suddenly there's a coach. It's So your team is Melbourne what? What are they called, Melbourne?
My team is the Richmond Tigers.
The Richmond Tigers. Okay, I love the names of these things.
Look, they're black and they're yellow, obviously being tigers. So,
but I'm just wondering, right? You're a sports guy, a lover of sports, kept fit. How did you keep fit during lockdown? If I know first world problems, but let's accept that that's a given. We still have to cope with pretty much a year of sedentary lifestyle, not much working, and trapped probably at home or within a few miles of it. So how does a guy who lives for sports cope?
So I'm going to start this story by going back to the last time we saw each other in Dubai. I was weighing in back then at 85 kilos.
Right.
So roll forward a number of years, and I became, we were lucky in Victoria because even though we were in lockdown, we were allowed to get out of the house for exercise. So you could go out and you could do, you couldn't go any further than 5 kilometers from your home. So I used to go, well, I still do, I used to obsess about getting my steps up. So 10,000, obviously the target. And if I didn't get my 10,000 steps in a day, I was as cranky as.
Right.
But I made it almost, I took to it almost with the religious fervor that, you know, got up, had my breakfast, didn't even have my first cup of coffee, pound the pavement, think, clear their head, plan the day, get home, have a cup of coffee. You know, I'm also pretty blessed that I've got a fantastic relationship with my wife, and we spent a lot of time together, obviously, in lockdown. And we just sort of gave each other strength and we pushed each other along to sort of get fit. So I got to a point where at Christmas I jumped on the scales and they tipped in at under 70 kilos.
You're loving that, right?
Yeah, oh yeah. And I sort of sat back and thought about it and thought, well, hang on, I haven't really changed anything in terms of my dietary habit, but I have actually become a heck of a lot more active in the last certainly 12 months. So it has helped me because it just gave me structure. It gave me something to do. And as I said, I would walk and I would clear my head and I would think about, well, what am I going to do today? Because one of the things, and I was talking to a lot of friends who struggled because they didn't stay active. And when I talk about staying active, it's not just your feet and your arms, it's your mind as well.
Go on.
So I found things to do. I got back in, I've always had a love of jigsaw puzzles, so I got back into doing jigsaw puzzles. I started playing with Lego, and it's not as crazy as it sounds because you can get these wonderful things called Lego dots now. So they give you this, base.
Yeah.
And it's Lego art, right? So so my kids gave me a Beatles thing, and you could make the 4 pictures from the White Album. So here's me sitting there putting this Lego together. I was doing all sorts of, you know, and I thought it's also a great opportunity to learn some stuff. So I know more about Excel now than I did, much more than I did 12 months ago. I'm much better at putting together, you know, presentations and other bits and pieces. I was fortunate that, so I do some pro bono work for the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology as a guest lecturer. I do 2 lectures for them, one every semester, for their School of Marketing and Sales. And I do the last lecture of each semester to round up the sales course for them. And I do this thing called the ethics of selling. A lot of people would say there's no ethics in selling, but there's plenty.
Yeah, no doubt.
So, yeah, I had that going as well. So I was able to actually rework my session, and we turned it from being a stand-up in front of a class to just like this, a fireside chat, right? Because I couldn't go into the lecture room and the students couldn't come in either. And you were talking about, the situation, with respect to potentially international travel. The universities here are talking about not having full in-class learning until potentially semester 1 next year.
Right. Which would
now we're talking about a sector where 30% of the students in our universities are foreign students. Right. So they've just lost a big chunk of their revenue. So they've now got to find a way to get through. So they're and it's great. For somebody like me who's a technologist and loves the innovation space, we're learning, right? We're innovating. Things are different. Forget what we used to think of as normal. It's not going to happen anymore.
Well, you're right as well, because, I heard a lot, especially in the early months of this year, sort of December, January, where people were talking about the new normal, the new normal, the new normal. And I'm like, it's not a new normal. This is normal. Where we're at right now. Just let's stop thinking about what might be. This is normal. This is what it is. You and I talking like this, running workshops, giving lectures. This is our world. And I know it's true because I've taken my first booking, George, for in-house face-to-face training. My first booking since August last year, when I did a workshop for a pharma company in full PPE. And it's for the middle of November. So, literally since March the 9th, 2020, I have been inside one client office, and that was a pharma company when I was in full PPE. The world's different. Right. Anybody waiting for a new normal, I think, is either very patient or slightly deluded. This is it. Get on with it.
I was talking to a real estate agent last week, and they were saying almost exactly the same thing. They were saying, 12 months ago, people weren't buying large properties. People weren't buying space. Right. They couldn't get enough apartments on their books to sell. Now they cannot move an apartment. Everybody wants space because everybody's realized, hang on a minute. And it's been, you know me, I've always been a glass half full sort of a person. So the silver lining here, I think, is that people have actually reconnected with what's important. So they've reconnected with their families. Working parents have been able to spend so much more time with their kids and build that quality of relationship. And they've had if they've got the space, they've been able to go outside and kick a soccer ball, a football, throw a ball around with the kids, push them on the swing, go crazy and jump up and down on the trampoline. And I think, when we look back on this period, as difficult as it is, I think we should rejoice in the fact that we have actually been able to do that. We have been able to reconnect with people who are near and dear to us.
I hear you. And I think there's a lot of truth in what you say. I think the opportunity, I know it even in looking at my own world, the gratitude that my family have had for being together. My brother contracted COVID last year, him and his wife, but it was just loss of smell. It was asymptomatic stuff, really. They weren't sick. My parents have lost a number of friends from it, but they've been doing their steps around the garden. My mum does her 10-minute exercise on YouTube with Mr. Motivator in the morning. I wonder if you talked before a little bit about being obsessive, and I wonder whether obsessing and being so committed to things, whether that helps in these times, you know, you're able, the way you talked about, you got up in the morning, you would go for your walk, you would pound those pavements, you come back, you had a structure. I'm wondering, was the structure as important as the kind of desire and obsession to engage in fitness and sports?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, you know me, I led a fairly structured work life, but having that structure, it was comfort. It was a nice, warm feeling.
Right.
You know, it helped me not think about what was going on. It gave me strength.
Yeah. Yeah, I see structure helping as well, right? And yeah, I was pleased to see that what didn't last was this sort of, you know, incessant nagging from the you know, the media, the spotlight, about how we should all be doing stuff in lockdown. You know, writing a book, reading all the books we haven't read, learning a musical instrument, doing all this stuff. Whereas actually, when you're describing it, I'm hearing, actually, do you know what? I've looked after myself and my family, mentally and
Yep.
physically. You talked about the kind of the mental cognitive stuff. Is that important? Like, you talked about keeping the brain kind of fit as well. I'm a big fan of mental fitness, so I'm interested in that. How did that help? And maybe you got stories where you've seen people who weren't able to, you know, keep it quite as straight as they'd want.
It look, it does help. It does help, and I don't mind saying this. I was reminded the other day that I'm going to turn 59 this year. Right? I don't feel it. I regularly get told I don't look it, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I try to stay sharp. I try to stay current. I try to stay mentally alert. And you're right. I know people who, through the last 9 months, 12 months, have regressed. They've gone into a cocoon. They've been, woe is me. They've become couch potatoes. They've done nothing for their betterment.
Yeah.
And now they're in a not good state. You know, now when we're trying to come out of this, they're like, oh well, you know, what'll happen will happen, and it's like, no, you've got to get active. You've got to start. You know, even if it's as simple as, probably a bad example, I was going to say, even if it's as simple as start reading Dr. Seuss again, you know, just get your mind thinking, just get your mind going. Because again, when the wheels are ticking in there, you don't have the chance to think, woe is me. And that I think has been the biggest problem. A lot of people have gone into, well, again, first world problems. I've lost my job. All the pressure of the world is coming on them, but they don't realize that, we were having this conversation before. We're told the best way to stay safe is wash your hands, wear a mask, PPE. It's great. We can do that. There are parts of the world that can't do that because they don't have the running water. They don't have the sanitary capability that we have here, right? So, and I hate saying it, but if you've got to occasionally stop and look at what's happening in the rest of the world to realize just how lucky you've got it. We sat back here in Australia and thought, my God, these crazy poor people in America where they've got 20 plus thousand deaths a day, and it's just, that strengthened us. That strengthened our resolve because we could see what was happening in the rest of the world. And when the government said nobody's coming in, we're like, that'll do.
Yeah, right. I mean, I know because one of my clients, an Australian guy, his daughter was here in the UK with him. So not dissimilar to you taking your daughter over in Dubai when she was sort of, working with you. And she wanted to go home to see her boyfriend. And, just at looking at trying to get home, one, only first class flight. So that's going to cost her $6,000. Then it's the quarantine in a hotel, not of her choice. That's another 1,700. So she was looking at basically, Dad, is there any way you could fund me 10 grand to go home and see my boyfriend? And he's like, I love you, but not that much. So it's a no from me. And we were jealous here of Australia and New Zealand, actually, because the way you locked down, although it seemed militant at the time, no one in or out, actually you can do that. And look how you got it under control. And it was tight as well, right? You couldn't go state to state. I mean, it was strict.
So we've only had full mobility in Australia for a week.
Wow. And was it just go mental, or just like flood outside and just everyone's out?
And look, we had it. I mean, we had it tough, right? So we had the horrible bushfires leading into the pandemic, and now we come out of the pandemic, and the areas that were affected by the bushfires are now flooded. I don't know whether you're hearing, but the upper East Coast have had 500 millimeters of rain in the last 4 days. So it's just, this is a country.
I heard the spiders are trying to escape. I saw some great images of spiders trying to get out of the way of the rising water levels.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
When the spiders are trying to get out, you've got a problem.
Right? Follow the spiders. So when you look back, you were always a reflective guy. I remember from our conversations, you would reflect on yourself, you reflected on learning. What's been your reflection as you kind of look back over this year, and the world is coming out, vaccine rollout here, 1 in 2 people in the UK have had a vaccine shot. So we're getting back to some kind of sense of normalcy. What do you reflect on when you look over this last year? Because you always look for learning.
Yeah. So look, I spend a lot of time, not as much time as I should, but I've spent some time with mum and dad. I was telling you before, my mum's 90, my dad's 95. They survived World War II in and out of concentration camps, right? And now they've come through this lockdown.
Yeah.
Mum actually says the lockdown was harder than the concentration camps, because at least in the concentration camps, she had her friends. They could get out. They could socialise a little bit, right? But I look at the way that they were able to cope with this. They've coped extraordinarily well.
They've been better. The older population have done well, actually. I think there's truth there right across the globe.
But I put that down to the fact that they've lived through ungodly hardship. War. I can't imagine what living through a war must be like. Yeah. But they have.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this is, in a lot of respects, this is a doddle, because they're not. There's nobody flying over their head dropping bombs on them.
No.
So I've sort of reflected on the fact that, as bad as it is, it's really a good thing. Yeah. It's not a good thing. It's really not as bad as it could have been.
Yeah.
And the other reflection is, and I'm not going to go into any of them, I'll put my hand up and willingly say I am a conspiracy theorist, but I haven't got caught up in any of the conspiracy theories around the virus, right? Because they're so nonsensical. Like the 20 most powerful people in the world have decided that there's too many of us, so they're going to, no. Because you look at it and you think, hang on a minute, population of 8 billion, 2.5 million, no. And over a 12-month period, there's quicker ways of doing this.
Well, my son always looks at the Avengers movie and thinks of Thanos. And at the beginning of all of this, he was saying, this is the global version of Thanos. He's, clicking his fingers and arbitrarily. Yep. But at least there was some meaning to that. Half the world's population, disappeared in one finger snap. But it's interesting what you say though about the, our parents' generation going through, because they lived through war, like proper war.
Yep.
My dad was born on the day of Hiroshima, so in his first 4 years, he lived through bombings. I remember him saying to me when one of his grandchildren was moaning early on in the pandemic, and he just said, "Brad, why don't they just shut up, sit on their luxury sofa, watch their 60-inch television and plug into Netflix? It's not like we're asking them to go to war." He was so pissed off. But he's right.
Yeah.
Right. Sit on your nice leather sofa, watching your 60-inch TV, tapping into your Netflix account or your Disney Plus account, and actually maybe you've got your Xbox upstairs as well that you want to play on, or the Wi-Fi where you're streaming because you've got ultra whatever.
Yeah.
These first world problems are.
Yeah. And then the other thing, I don't know what it was like for you guys over there, but we got a lot of information not thrown at us, but made available to us with respect to the Spanish flu, right?
Mm.
So the Spanish flu was 100 years ago.
Right.
And you think about how we've been able to get on top of this thing based on the fact that we've got access to media, we can communicate, that the exchange is relatively rapid. What must it have been like in 1919, 1920, 1921, when they didn't have let alone all the technical advances, the scientific advances that we've had, and the medicinal advances that we've had since then, right?
Yeah.
That must have been hell on earth.
Right, not only that, right? If remember, Europe had just come out of a massive war, was pretty torn up, and then literally this bug was going around, as you say, killing actually millions upon millions of people.
Yep.
I think it shows you how amazing the human race is, that we can create this vaccine in 1 year and roll it out. I've actually got my jab on Saturday, my first vaccine, and once I've got the second one, I'm good to go pretty much. But the world's going to open up slowly. I think I don't know if you feel this, but I sense a cautiousness.
Yep.
In the world.
Yep. So we're talking about a full travel bubble with New Zealand, which would be good. There's talk that between now and mid this year, there'll probably be a travel bubble between here and Singapore.
Oh, great.
So we're starting to sort of stretch the wings a little bit. A lot of it is still discussion. And of course, a lot of it may change at the drop of a hat if the situation turns dire, right? But and I think we were talking about how do you get through. There's hope. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm pretty sure it's not the train coming the other way, right? There's hope that we will get through this. You're right. Turn the multiple vaccines around in a hurry. We're starting the rollout of them. We'll get there. It'll take time, but we will get there.
Do you think that Australians are compliant? Because we've learned that British people are not compliant. We were very good in the first lockdown, but by this third one that we're currently in, if you went out for a walk with me and my dog to the park on Sunday, you'd have seen thousands of people out in the park for hours. There's no way it looked like there was a lockdown. There's cars on the road. I mean, it felt normal day working weekend. I don't know if it feels like that in Oz.
So you can probably divide it down the middle here. Yes, we have had events where you would swear nothing was going on, right? That it was situation normal. We spoke about the tennis, right? They brought these tennis players in for our enjoyment. Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Yeah. What about the poor Australians who can't come back home? But anyway, that's a different story. But there are also those people who are like, no. now's not the time to get complacent. Now's the time to double down, because if we smash this thing in the head properly, the future looks a heck of a lot better. So it's sort of on that scale at the moment.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because you've worked as a leader for nearly 20 years. I've observed in the political leadership quite a strange kind of difference, say, to how, as a leader of people in an organization you work, the enablement, the kind of encouragement. I don't know, it's almost as if the leaderships around the world, they haven't necessarily responded great compared
I think
to
it's
how
ironic. I think there have been some leaders who have totally dismissed this as a non-entity, and they've been impacted by it. Right? You look at the guy in Brazil, you look at Donald, you look at Boris, right? These guys, they were naysayers and they got it, right? And then you've had other leaders being, no, this thing is real, and we need to, like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, to a lesser extent, Scott Morrison here, Angela Merkel. So the people who've taken this thing seriously, their countries have come out of this a heck of a lot better than they had. But I just found it ironic that Donald, who's saying it's nothing more than a flu, it'll be over in April, and. Now, here's the conspiracy theorist in me as well. Did he or didn't he? Was it a political stunt to try and win some votes? I don't know, but...
Well, as George, I've shared on this podcast before, right? I was blocked by the Donald on Twitter. It's one of my Twitter claim to fames, because I would challenge him in a very verbose way on a regular basis for his misogynistic behavior and racist lies. So I would call him out. Anyway, one day I realized I wasn't getting him on my feed. I went to check and I've been blocked. I'm sure Donald didn't block me. I'm sure it was one of his people. But I'll tell you what was really interesting for me, that thing. And like you, I enjoy a good conspiracy theory, right? So I believe Elvis Presley is still alive somewhere. I think Marilyn Monroe was killed by, the Kennedys. So there's lots of things that I believe in. But with this one, I think he may have had it. But he had about $500,000 worth of medication given to him in like 3 days, which probably captured it like straight off the bat, right? But there was a part of me at the time that was thinking, he's not had it. You don't get COVID and get better in 2 days. And there was this wonderful scene, wasn't there, where he was standing on the lawn, like on the balcony with the helicopter, and all it needed was like the music from Valkyrie to be playing, and you'd have had a really good film shot. So I think some have used it to bolster. I wonder for us minions in the world, like the guys you work with, right? The guys you're going to work with, the roles that you do, how are everyday human beings like reacting to you, like team members? What are they sharing? When you were working as a consultant, what were
good question. So I've had deep and meaningfuls with a couple of people who weren't coping well. So you try and help them see the other side. You try and help them see the light, or the positive. As I said before, I had people say, this is the best thing that's happened, because I've got to know my wife, my significant other again. I'm involved in my kid's life. I'd forgotten how to do maths. So despite the fact that I'm supposedly home teaching my kids, they're teaching me, right? So I've seen both sides of it, right? But I've found the most important thing is I haven't broached the subject. I've let them come to me. Right, so I haven't actively gone out to try to counsel, to try and be this, soothsayer. I've made myself available and had people come and talk to me, and that, hellously that's helped me as well, because as I said, I spoke with some people who were really, really struggling, and that sort of helped me realize I'm not doing so bad after all.
Well, I think offering perspective like that, and I see it, I think I see it every day. You know, we've talked about first world problems in this call. I remember speaking to a woman back in April, May last year, so a month or two into lockdown. She was living in an apartment in Paris with her husband and two young children who were both being homeschooled. She was working from home. Her husband had been furloughed, and she lived in an apartment with no balcony and no courtyard. And she was going mad, literally pulling her hair out. And it was 3 weeks into the lockdown. You know, whereas you and I are talking about sitting in the garden, you know,
Yeah.
our walk every day. I mean, really?
So I had a friend of mine who was going through a tough time, and he's living on his own in an apartment in the middle of the city, high rise, no balcony. He bought himself a guitar and learned how to play again.
I love that. Yeah.
Right? And he was lucky because it was one of his neighbors who was selling. He bought a Gibson Les Paul for $75.
That's a good deal for a Gibson, right?
Yeah, right. So he learned how to play guitar again, right? Other people I know, you know, you spoke about writing books. Yeah, they've taken the opportunity to sit down and write a memoir or learn a language. You know, so the poor woman in France, you know, my advice to her would have been, think of something you've always wanted to do or something you've always wanted to learn. Block a chunk of time in your day and dedicate it to that. Just find your time, right? Just find a little piece of time for you.
And I think, you know what? I think you've even stumbled on the title for this episode, because I love that phrase. Find your time. Because it doesn't actually matter what you do, right? It doesn't matter whether that's going for a run or whether that's doing some press-ups on the dining room chair. I had a friend in Ibiza who, you know, obviously works in the entertainment and sort of luxury retail industry, decimated by the pandemic. And he lived in a small apartment there, and he was doing exercises, and he was using wine bottles because he worked in this restaurant. You know, he was using wine bottles as his weights, and you know, just being a bit creative. And this is how I think people got through. And this is what's really struck me: the strength of human spirit has absolutely marveled me. I've loved that, right? How innovative and creative and resilient. But it feels now like it's an endurance test.
It started out as a sprint and it's turned into an ultra marathon.
An ultra, right? So now it's like you've done your 10,000 steps 4 days ago. It's like you're now up to 32,000 steps. It's like it's a long ass walk. This.
Yep. Yeah. It is.
You mentioned hope before, George. We're kind of coming full circle. What's your hope? Because you know you've got 20-something kids. You've got you mentioned, you know, a 59. You said you're going to be, but you're in the best shape of your life. What's your hope when you look forward? Like, what do you feel is the positive hope that sits at the back of your head and you bring to the forefront when you think about hope?
I'm searching for the words, Brad, but my hope, and I'll personalize this, right? My hope is that in the not too distant future, I'll be able to sit in a pub in the heart of London with you having a beer.
Yeah, I've got the pub in mind already.
Right. I've been lucky in my life. We've travelled extensively. It's actually the travel that I miss.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to say that because when you travel for business, you know this, right? people think it's such a glamorous thing. It's not. It's not. Effectively, you get on board a bus, you go to wherever the destination, you go from the airport to your hotel, you go from your hotel to the office, you do a full day's work there, and then you do a full day's work because your other job hasn't stopped. So it's not as people think. Yes, you might get to eat in some nice restaurants, and yes, if you're lucky and you take a little bit of time around that, you might get to see some things. But we've been lucky, and we've travelled extensively for pleasure. 2 years ago, we went to Brazil and saw the waterfalls, right? Which are amazing, and I would encourage anybody, if the opportunity comes to go and see the waterfalls in Brazil, take it. They're amazing, right? But that is my hope. My hope is that, this time next year, we'll be able to get in an aeroplane and go somewhere again.
Yeah, and I think I share the same hope that we can travel sooner rather than later. I'm going to echo that. I think traveling for work, I did it for 20 years. And actually, by the time the pandemic was hitting, I was pretty done with travel, right? I would do a few Asian trips a year, but most of the time my team were doing the Europe travel. I wasn't jumping on buses anymore, to go to Germany at 5 a.m. for a day's workshop. But I was meant to be flying out to Singapore. The client was playing actually for first class. I was so looking forward to having a bed on this trip to Singapore. And then, of course, lockdown happened and the flights were cancelled and the trips were cancelled. I can't wait to go for a workshop, like traveling for a bit of work, like to go for a meeting, to go and do some coaching. That sounds like it could be really lovely.
So I'm going to recast my hope here, Brad.
Yeah,
I think you'll like this. So my hope is to host you at the pub that my daughter, her fiance, and his dad go to, and I go to, and then walk to the MCG and sit at the MCG and watch a game and walk back. So there's my hope. How's that?
I'm there. That is like the perfect tipping point for this discussion. What an absolute pleasure. Yes, I would love to go and watch. Can we watch cricket rather than?
Yeah, we can go watch cricket.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'd love to be.
We've got the Ashes is coming up next year. Next year,
I think. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so, well, we can do that. That's a given.
Right, a night game at the MCG via the pub with your son and her fiance.
Yeah, done.
Done. George de Bono, thank you so much. Listen, be well, be safe, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Let's not wait 8 years before we talk again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brad.
George, that's great. Thank you so much. I'm going to push stop.
Brilliant. When the spiders are trying to get out, you've got a problem.